Okay, so we've got a pretty interesting set of articles here, all about these big global power blocks, the G7 and G20. Those are familiar names, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But then you've got the BRICS and the SQ, and they're popping up in the news more and more these days. It's almost like we're seeing uh, a kind of realignment of global power happening.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time to be watching global politics. It's you're right. The BRICS and SQ, they are getting more and more prominent, especially here in the Asian Pacific.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to explore in this deep dive. What does their rise mean,
Mhm.
especially for the ASEAN region and in particular for Indonesia? So think of this as your, I guess, your cheat sheet
Yeah.
to how these power dynamics are playing out right in our backyard, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's an important one too. I mean, especially when you think about the economic and geopolitical implications for countries like Indonesia who are trying to navigate these shifting alliances.
Absolutely. So first up, let's compare the G7 and the BRICS. One thing that really jumps out at me is the sheer population difference. The BRICS now represent something like 45% of the world's population,
Wow, that's huge.
while the G7 comes in at just 10%. That's a massive difference when you think about potential markets, workforce, even political influence on the global stage.
Yeah, that is a key point. I mean, just think about it. That kind of population size, it translates into a lot of economic potential. You've got a huge internal market, a vast labor pool.
Right.
That's attractive to investors, and it gives them leverage in global trade negotiations. But of course, managing such a large and diverse population, that comes with its own challenges too, of course, especially when you're talking about economic development and social stability.
And it's interesting how both groups are wielding their power as well. The G7, despite its smaller population, they're making some pretty significant financial moves,
Yeah.
like that $50 billion loan to Ukraine backed by frozen Russian assets. That's a bold move that could have ripple effects. I mean, not just on the immediate conflict, but on global financial stability. And it might even, make some countries think twice about aligning themselves too closely with either bloc.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that loan to Ukraine, it's a prime example of how economic decisions can become really powerful political tools. It's also a reminder that the G7 still holds a lot of sway in the global financial system.
Hmm.
But the BRICS, they are actively working to change that by creating their own financial mechanisms, like
Yeah.
the New Development Bank, which is sometimes called the BRICS Bank. It's essentially their alternative to the World Bank, offering funding for development projects
Yeah.
in member countries and beyond.
So they're not just talking about changing the global order. They're actually they're taking concrete steps to build an alternative system.
Exactly.
That's pretty ambitious.
It is. And it's not just limited to development banks either, right? I mean, they're
Not-
working on a BRICS payment system too to lessen reliance on that Western-dominated SWIFT system.
So trying to really reduce their dependence on Western-controlled financial infrastructure.
Exactly. It's a long-term strategy, but the BRICS are definitely laying the groundwork here for, I guess you could say, a multipolar world where power isn't concentrated in the hands of just a few Western nations.
It makes you wonder how all of this is being perceived here in the ASEAN region.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a region with a lot of economic potential.
Mm.
And both the BRICS and the G7, they're vying for influence here.
Absolutely. Countries in the ASEAN region, I mean, like Indonesia, they have to be very strategic about how they engage with both blocs. It's about carefully balancing their economic interests with their political interests,
Exactly.
making sure they don't get caught in the middle of a power struggle.
Right. Speaking of Indonesia, they're taking on the ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. That puts them in a particularly interesting position as they try to navigate all of these complex global dynamics.
Yeah, Indonesia's going to be under a lot of scrutiny. I mean, as they try to maintain good relationships with both the West and the East, their leadership is going to be crucial. I mean, in determining ASEAN's overall approach to these shifting global power dynamics.
There's a lot to juggle. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the G20. They've got their social summit happening in Rio de Janeiro this November. And it's not just about economics, right? They're bringing in social movements, NGOs, to have a voice on global issues like combating hunger, promoting sustainable development.
Yeah, I think what's so fascinating about the G20 Social Summit is that it reflects this growing recognition that global challenges require solutions that go beyond just traditional economic policies, you know? So bringing in civil society, grassroots organizations, you get diverse perspectives, and hopefully that leads to more sustainable, more equitable solutions.
It's a way of making the G20 more inclusive, more responsive to the needs of people on the ground, especially in developing countries like those here in the ASEAN region. But before we delve further into that, we need to talk about another player, one that's particularly relevant to this region, the SKO.
Yeah, the SKO is interesting because it's so heavily focused on Central Asia, which, might not seem immediately connected to Southeast Asia, but the SKO's emphasis on these new transport corridors, like the potential Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan route.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
It is, yeah, but it could have significant implications for trade and security dynamics in Asia.
And why is that so significant, especially for ASEAN nations?
Well, I mean, think about it. These new routes, they could offer alternative pathways for goods and resources, potentially lessening reliance on existing routes, which might be vulnerable to disruption or geopolitical tensions.
Right.
Okay. So this diversification, it could be a game changer for trade in the region, potentially bringing economic benefits, but also, also new security challenges as well.
So it's not just about economics, it's also got potential security implications. It's almost like we're watching a whole new map of trade and influence being drawn right before our eyes.
Exactly. And all of this is happening against the backdrop of, existing tensions, like those in the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait.
Right.
These are flashpoints that could easily escalate, impacting not only regional stability, but global trade and security as well.
This is all getting very complex, but let's try to unpack it a bit more after a quick break. We'll be back in a moment to delve deeper into how these global dynamics are playing out in Southeast Asia, what it all means for Indonesia.
It's interesting, isn't it, to think about Indonesia's position, I mean. They're right at the crossroads of all this, with these major power blocks all kind of, vying for influence in their backyard.
Yeah, it does seem like they're walking a bit of a tightrope, trying to keep everyone happy, the Western powers and the G7, the emerging economies and the BRICS, especially with their upcoming ASEAN chairmanship. How do you see them navigating all that?
Well, I think Indonesia has a history of, non-alignment, promoting dialogue, and that could serve them well here. Their challenge, I think, is to use those skills to make sure that ASEAN doesn't become a pawn in this larger geopolitical chess game. They need to find that common ground, promote cooperation, but at the same time uphold ASEAN's own interests and their autonomy.
A delicate balancing act for sure. But, speaking of balancing acts, the BRICS seem pretty intent on building a real alternative to the Western-dominated financial system. Their summit in Kazan, I mean, that was a pretty clear message.
Oh, absolutely. The Kazan Declaration, that was a statement. It really laid out their ambitions to create their own institutions, their own set of rules, essentially, reshaping the global financial landscape.
So what does that look like in practice? I mean, we talked about the new development bank. Are there other concrete examples of how they're actually putting these ideas into action?
Well, the new development bank, that's a big one. It's providing funding for development projects, offering an alternative to the World Bank. But they're also looking at creating a BRICS payment system, which would, lessen their reliance on that SWIFT system. And that, if they pull it off, could significantly reduce Western control over international financial transactions.
That's a big if, though, isn't it? I mean, do they really have the clout to pull that off, to really challenge the established global financial order?
That's the billion-dollar question. I mean, they definitely have the population.
Right.
And their economic power is growing. But, building a parallel financial system from scratch, that's a massive undertaking. Requires a lot of coordination, resources, buy-in from other nations.
And it's not just about economics either, is it? There are also political and ideological differences within the BRICS themselves. Keeping that coalition cohesive, especially as it expands, that's going to be a hurdle.
Exactly. The BRICS, they're a diverse group with different political systems, different priorities. So maintaining that unity, but also respecting those differences, that's essential for their long-term success. And, it kind of highlights the challenges that come with shifting from this unipolar world dominated by the West to a more multipolar system.
And that shift to a multipolar world, it seems to be a recurring theme in all of this. Yeah. How do you think that impacts a country like Indonesia, right there in the heart of Southeast Asia?
Well, Indonesia has to play its cards carefully. They need to cultivate these strong ties with all of these powerful groups, the G7, the BRICS, the SCO, find areas of common interest, build bridges. It's a long game, and taking sides could really be detrimental to their interests.
So it's all about balance. Can't afford to alienate either the West or the East.
Right. They need to find a way to benefit from both sides
Yeah.
while still maintaining their independence and upholding ASEAN's neutrality.
You hit the nail on the head. Indonesia's strategic importance within ASEAN and Southeast Asia as a whole. I mean, it makes them a pretty sought-after partner. Both the G7 and the BRICS, they see value in having a good relationship with Indonesia. And that gives Indonesia a degree of leverage, a chance to, shape the agenda, advocate for policies that benefit their region.
Exactly.
It sounds like Indonesia has a real opportunity here to step up as a leader on the global stage, not just follow the lead of the bigger, more powerful countries.
But I think that's a great point. I mean, this evolving global landscape, it presents it's a unique opportunity for Indonesia to leverage those relationships and advocate for things that are important to them, like sustainable development, free trade, regional stability. The key, I think, is going to be how they use that influence to navigate these changing dynamics and secure a future that benefits, Indonesia and the ASEAN region as a whole.
And this G20 social summit that we were talking about earlier seems like a good example of this evolving landscape, the need for broader solutions. What insights can we get from this event, especially as it relates to Indonesia and ASEAN?
I think the G20 Social Summit, what it highlights is this growing recognition that that global issues, they can't be solved by governments alone. It really underscores the importance of civil society, NGOs, grassroots organizations in addressing challenges like poverty, inequality, climate change. Their perspectives, their experiences on the ground, those are invaluable when you're trying to craft effective solutions.
It's about bringing those diverse voices to the table and holding leaders accountable for delivering on their promises.
Exactly. It's about making global governance more inclusive.
Yeah.
More responsive to the needs of people, especially in developing countries. It's about injecting that a dose of bottom-up perspective into top-down decision-making.
So in a way, it's like bringing a little bit more democracy into the global decision-making process.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. The G20 Social Summit, it represents an effort to make the G20 more representative, more accountable, and ultimately, more effective in addressing the real-world challenges that people are facing around the globe.
This focus on global challenges, I think it's a good segue into something we haven't really talked about in depth yet. Security. What are some of the key security issues at play in this region, particularly as they relate to Indonesia and ASEAN?
Well, we touched on the Taiwan Strait earlier, and that's a major flashpoint. China is becoming increasingly assertive towards Taiwan, and that raises some serious concerns about potential conflict. And a conflict like that would have global repercussions. I mean, disrupting those vital shipping routes, sending shockwaves through the global economy.
It really is a reminder of how interconnected we all are. Economically. And in terms of security, I mean, you have a conflict in one part of the world, and it can quickly escalate and impact everyone.
Precisely. And it really underscores the importance of diplomacy. Open communication between China, Taiwan, and the United States. These key players, they need to engage in dialogue, manage their differences, and work towards a peaceful resolution. Finding that common ground, recognizing those shared interests and stability, that's paramount.
But the Taiwan Strait isn't the only security concern in the region, is it?
No, it's not. The South China Sea, that's another area of tension. With overlapping territorial claims and ongoing disputes. And you've got China's assertive actions in the region, coupled with the presence of other regional powers. It creates a really a complex and potentially volatile situation.
It sounds like a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
Yeah.
Are there any efforts to kind of address these tensions peacefully and prevent things from escalating into conflict?
Well, there are ongoing diplomatic efforts to manage those disputes and try to find peaceful resolutions. ASEAN, they play a key role in promoting dialogue, encouraging cooperation among the nations involved. It's a delicate process, but it's essential if you want to maintain stability and prevent conflict.
So it's a mixed bag then. You've got these serious risks to regional security, but at the same time, there are these avenues for cooperation. And peaceful resolution, it all seems to come back to that balancing act that we keep talking about.
That's right. It all circles back to finding that equilibrium, navigating those competing interests, managing those delicate relationships. And within all of that, Indonesia's role as the ASEAN chair, that becomes incredibly important.
Absolutely. Their leadership, their ability to foster dialogue and cooperation, it's going to be crucial in these challenging times. And we'll delve deeper into Indonesia's specific role and the future of ASEAN in the next part of our deep dive. You know, it's fascinating how all these global power shifts, these rivalries we've been talking about, how they're playing out on a regional level.
Right.
It's not just about the G7, the G20, the BRICS, the SKO, all operating in their own little bubbles.
Yeah.
You have to look at how they're interacting with key regional players like ASEAN.
Absolutely. It's like a multi-level chess game, you know? You've got moves being made on the global board that are impacting the regional dynamics and vice versa.
Right.
And ASEAN is right there in the thick of it.
Trying to chart a course through all these competing interests.
Exactly. And, you know, ASEAN isn't this monolithic bloc either.
Right.
I mean, it's member states. They have different relationships with these larger groups.
Some leaning more towards the West.
Yeah.
Others forging closer ties with the East.
Exactly. And I think that's where Indonesia's leadership as the current ASEAN chair becomes so crucial. I mean, they have to find a way to manage those internal differences, maintain that unity within the organization, and present a cohesive front on the global stage.
It's a tall order, but I mean, ASEAN has a long history of successfully navigating these kinds of complexities.
Yeah, they have.
I mean, they've been a force for stability and cooperation in the region for decades.
For sure.
How do you see that experience informing their approach to these current challenges?
Well, I think ASEAN's commitment to consensus building and its, you know, their principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of their members, that's been key to their success. And I think those principles are going to be essential as they navigate the, you know, the increasing pressure from both the West and the East.
Yeah, it's going to be a real test of their diplomatic skills.
Yeah.
Their ability to find common ground when you've got all these competing interests.
Absolutely.
And those interests are, you know, they're really intensifying in areas like economic development and security.
Right.
ASEAN has done a remarkable job of promoting trade and investment within the region.
Yeah.
But now they're facing new challenges as these larger blocs, they're all vying for influence.
For sure. ASEAN has, you know, created this dynamic economic bloc that's attractive to investment from both the West and the East. But now they've got to strike that balance, right? Making sure that this engagement with the larger blocs benefits the region as a whole and doesn't lead to, you know, too much dependence on any one power.
It's a tightrope walk, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they need to leverage their economic attractiveness to get favorable trade deals invested.
Yeah.
But at the same time, maintain their autonomy. Avoid getting tangled up in any kind of potential power struggle.
Exactly. ASEAN needs to, you know,
play their cards right.
Yeah, play their cards right, make sure their interests are protected, that they can act independently on the global stage.
So as we look ahead, what are some of the key trends to watch for? I mean, in the relationship between these global groups and ASEAN.
Okay.
Especially with Indonesia's upcoming leadership role.
Well, one trend that's pretty clear is the increasing competition for influence in the region. Both the G7 and the BRICS, they see Southeast Asia as strategically important, economically and politically. And I think that competition is only going to intensify in the coming years, you know, putting pressure on ASEAN to choose sides.
And that kind of pressure could create real tension.
Oh, yeah.
Instability.
For sure.
Potentially even leading to conflict if it's not managed very carefully.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a real risk. But it also presents an opportunity for ASEAN. You know, they can play this mediating role, encourage dialogue and cooperation between these larger blocs. They can use their position as a neutral party, you know, try to bridge that divide and foster a more stable and cooperative environment.
Almost like they can act as a buffer.
Yeah.
You know, to prevent the region from becoming a battleground for these global power struggles.
Exactly. ASEAN can be that voice of reason, advocating for diplomacy, multilateralism, peaceful resolutions to disputes. And Indonesia, with its history of non-alignment, strong diplomatic ties, I mean, they're well positioned to lead that effort.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
okay,
what's the key takeaway you want to leave with our listener?
I think the main takeaway is that the global landscape is changing, and it's changing dramatically. And those changes, they're having a profound impact on Southeast Asia. You know, the rise of the BRICS, the evolving priorities of the G7, the growing influence of the SCO, all of those are creating both opportunities and challenges for ASEAN.
Right.
And understanding these dynamics, navigating them strategically, that's going to be crucial for the future of the region.
Yeah, it's a complex situation. It's constantly changing.
Absolutely.
Requires careful analysis, strategic thinking, a real commitment to dialogue and cooperation.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this fascinating deep dive.
It's been my pleasure.
I think our listener has gained some really valuable insights from our conversation today.
I hope so.
So until next time,
Yeah.
keep exploring, keep learning,
Keep those questions coming.
and keep thinking critically about the world around you.